Okay, well, in view of the inclement weather, people may still be trying to get here, but I think we'll get started. I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Vadim Grishin, who's going to speak to us today. He has extensive experience working with the Bretton Woods institutions. He was the executive director and board member of the World Bank Group from November 2010 to October 2014, and he's currently a senior advisor at the International Monetary Fund. And of course, he teaches here at Georgetown the economics of transition. So welcome, and we look forward to hearing your talk.
Oh, thank you very much for this kind introduction. And it's a great honor and opportunity for me to share with you my vision and some ideas regarding the past, present, and future of Bretton Woods institutions, specifically the World Bank Group. So let me start maybe with history, because it's 70 years after Bretton Woods invented and created, and the political basis for the Bretton Woods system was in the confluence of two key conditions: the shared experience of two world wars, with the sense that failure to deal with the economic problems after the First World War had led to the Second, and clear understanding that that concentration of power in small number of states at that period permitted to make this deal. So the Bretton Woods system was the first example of fully negotiated monetary order intended to govern monetary relations among independent and interdependent national states. So it was 730 delegates from 45 allied countries gathered in Mount Washington Hotel in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. And after 20 years of hot discussions, they signed an agreement in setting up a system of rules, institutions, procedures to regulate international monetary system. So the planners of Bretton Woods established the International Monetary Fund and the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, which today is part of the World Bank Group. So these organizations became operational in 1945, after a sufficient number of countries had ratified the agreement. It's in accordance with the conventional wisdom, Bretton Woods was the product of an amiable Anglo-American collaboration. The United States, and it's true that the United States and the United Kingdom were the most powerful in attendance and dominated the negotiations. But in reality, it was part of a much more ambitious geopolitical agenda. And it was competition between the representative of the UK and the US during these days. So, and the founding fathers of Bretton Woods institutions were Lord Keynes, and who, even at that moment, was a revolutionary and renowned British economist. And he is on the right side. And Dexter, and Harry Dexter White, at that moment he was chief economist of the US Treasury, and pretty hard negotiator, the dogged, self-made American technocrat. In paradox way, both of them were connected with Russia. In 1925, Keynes married Lydia Lopokova, and well-known Russian ballerina and one of the stars of Sergei Diaghilev ballet troupe in Paris, and the union was happy. But more important that Keynes tried to create absolutely new and revolutionary system, and he argued for radical changes in management of currencies. He proposed the creation of a common world unit of currency, the banker, and new global institutions, a world central bank and the International Clearing Union. Keynes envisaged this institution managing an international trade and payment system with strong incentives for countries to avoid substantial trade deficits or surpluses. But the US had greater negotiating strength, and the final outcome accorded more closely to the more conservative plan of Harry Dexter White. So both created as a result of Bretton Woods Conference institutions, the World Bank and International Monetary Fund, they compromised primarily reflected the American vision. White was a very complex and controversial figure. On the one hand, the architect of the dollar's privileged place in the Bretton Woods monetary system. And when the IMF began operational in 1946, President Truman named White as its first US executive director. Since no deputy managing director post had yet been created, White served occasionally as acting managing director and generally played a highly influential role during the IMF first year. On the other hand, he very privately admired Soviet economic planning and was engaged in clandestine communication with Soviet intelligence officials. White was accused in 1948 of spying for the Soviet Union. In August 1948, White testified and defended his records to the House Un-American Activities Committee. 3 days after testifying, he died of a heart attack. So White's biographer, Ben Stale, says White acted out of idealism, not as a member of Communist Party or not simply because he believed that the Soviet Union was a vital US ally. So, but it's in paradox way, Lord Keynes also died practically before he could see the result of these efforts create new monetary system. So he died also of heart attack in April 1946, shortly after returning from the first meeting of IMF and World Bank boards of governors in Savannah, Georgia. But let me come back to the World Bank, to main topic, and the World Bank. What is the World Bank today? So it's 188 member countries, owners and clients. Its main purpose is to end extreme poverty and promote shared prosperity. And for sure, the World Bank now still is the largest source of developing finance and experience. During 8 years of financing development project, it was invested almost $500 billion or more than $500 billion US dollars. My question to you, is it a big money?
It doesn't seem very large in comparison with 68 years and the size of the world economy.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. So, in comparison, Western and Eastern Germany, unification. Germany invested 2 trillion euros in Eastern Germany. So the volume is not the key indicator of the role which play World Bank the current developing projects and system. That's why let me see and come back to the initial phase of its activity and to see the main phases and stages of its development. So it was created with the main purpose to rebuild, to reconstruct Europe. And it's curious that in June 25, 1946, when the World Bank operations begin, the staff was only 26 persons, 12 executive directors, and 38 member countries. Now, the staff is 12,000, 25 executive directors, and 188 member countries. Before 1968, the reconstruction and development loans provided by the World Bank were relatively small and under very strict conditions. But it's also very important to understand the difference in the mandate of IMF and the World Bank, because also there are a lot of paradox in history of the Bretton Woods institutions. But the fund, International Monetary Fund, practically realized function of the bank because it invests, and this financing payment were usually short and medium term, and the fund focusing on design policy programs to solve balance of payments issues of countries which pass through the critical periods in their development. The World Bank mandate and mission since the beginning was different. So promotes long-term economic development, and it frequently acts as a fund. But historically, it was named bank and the fund. So, but functionally, it's a little bit confusing because a fund, in many cases, closer to bank's activity, and the bank, the World Bank, closer to fund activity, especially regarding its policy and financing of less developing countries. And the World Bank, the fund primarily can fund it through pool of quota contributions that its members provide, and the bank uses also these contributions, but can issue bonds. So, and the bank staff usually have more specialists in particular issues, sectors, and techniques. So with understanding of this difference between the fund and the bank, we can see the development of the World Bank operations. So it started in Europe, and the first loan approved by the bank was a loan to France on 250 million for reconstruction purposes. During 50 years of the bank history, it was the biggest single loan. But as I said, at that period there were strict conditions. And one of the conditions which bank moved towards the French government was connected with the presence of Communist Party representative in the government of in the French government. So before the loan was approved, the French government was told that its members associated with the Communist Party would have to be removed. The French government complied with this request and removed the Communist coalition government. Within hours, the loan to France was approved. The second loan to Netherlands was also very big, around 210 million. It's important to stress the bank, since the beginning, started its operations also with developing countries, particularly Chile. In paradox way, the World Bank also financed in 1947 Poland. So this initial stage was very, very important. But when the Marshall Plan went into effect in 1947, many European countries began to receive aid from other sources and institutions. And faced with this competition, the World Bank slowly shifted its focus to non-European countries. I remember that the last big operation realized at that period in the European space was the credit to Italy in 1959 to build a nuclear plant. But it's also important to stress that the bank started to diversify its structure, and in 1956 International Financial Corporation was established with authorized capital of 100 million, 47 member countries by the end of 1956. What is the difference between IBRD, or the bank, and the IFC? Are you aware? Do you know the difference between these two arms or two units of the World Bank?
Yeah, actually works with the private sector.
Yes, it's a private sector arm. And the bank, IBRD, works exclusively under sovereign guarantees. It's a privilege. It's creates additional safety to any operations of the bank. And IFC doesn't work under state guarantees. From my perspective, there are four major stages or phases in development of the World Bank Group. The first connected with this reconstruction of Europe. The second with the activities of Mr. McNamara as the president of the bank. He restructured the bank and started a new kind of operations and projects in different industries, agriculture. He focused on activity of the bank on infrastructure projects, and started also very ambitious and efficient projects in healthcare and education. So it's important also, he was a very good manager, by the way. And in 1960, an International Development Association was established. It's unit of the bank which provided financing for poor and newly created independent states. What is the difference between IDER and the bank. My next question to you. So how you see it?
Well, IDER works with, let's say, the poorest of the poor that don't have financial capacity to actually have any credibility in their sovereign guarantees.
No, so sovereign guarantees extended to IDER loans, but the difference that it's the interest rates are very low. The significant part of this financing just grants, and it's long-term financing, usually up to 30 years. And since that moment, the discussion started. Shall the World Bank group focusing exclusively on less developed nations, or it's reasonable to work in middle-income countries, lakes countries, and to try to move on two tracks. The argument of those who prefer to see the bank as the institution focusing on less developing countries is that the core poverty is there. But at the same time, the pockets of poverty exist also in mixed countries. This is why having this eradication of poverty, extreme poverty, as the goal, the bank cannot limit or just restrict its activity on mixed countries. It's necessary also to work with mixed countries. On the other hand, the bank cannot earn money on operations with mixed countries through IDER. There are permanent replenishment of IDER resources. The last replenishment meeting took place a year ago, and it was donated $52 billion for activity of IDER during next 3 years. But the bank can earn money in its operations in middle-income countries, and it can provide also reimbursable services and to use this as developing institutions, to use these profits to invest to less developing countries' projects. So this system was invented in early 60s, and with some modification we still have it now. So in 1966, International Center for Settlement of Investment Disputes was established. It's important international arbitrage which could resolve hundreds and thousands disputes connected with a complicated situation with developing countries. And the third stage of internal transformation of the bank happened during the presidency of Mr. Wolfenson, James Wolfenson, or James I, or the National Bank called now, having the current president also James. So Mr. Wolfenson created a matrix system. He added to the regional and industrial specialization network, which focused on cross-cutting activities. And it was effort to respond to the accelerated globalization. So, and then another very important step or changes happened in this period was connected with the new membership, which received former Soviet Union republics in 1992, and formation of new chairs and restructuring of the board of the bank. One of the important goals which Mr. Wolferson added to the agenda of the World Bank was eradication of or fight against corruption. And for sure, special programs are connected with the process of transition in Central and Eastern Europe and former Soviet Union base. So it's important also to mention that in 1988, Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency was established. It's provide insurance against political risks, and there are some other structural adjustments which already mentioned, and among other important shifts which happened in the mid of 90s, that the bank extended its activity to some more upper level middle income countries, particularly South Korea during Asian crisis. Afterwards, the bank started to work also with EU members, traditional EU members. The bank realized some operations in Spain, Italy, and Greece during and after financial crisis of 2008. But it's happened a little bit later. So a new era among also important changes and adjustments, it was involvement of the World Bank in realization of this Millennium Development Goals. They absolutely coincide with the core mandate of the bank, and now the bank is involved in modification of MDGs, and we hope that that during next month a new set of goals will be improved, which will help to less developing countries tackle the critical issues in their development in different areas. So during this period of recent period, the bank focused more and more on environmental issues, though the first operations connected with climate change and environment happened during the Mr. McNamara period of presidency. Now prototype carbon fund was launched, and I should stress that climate change and environment issues are in the core of the World Bank priorities everywhere. It means in less developing countries and mixed countries as well. So during last financial crisis, the World Bank Group activities was very, very high. So the investment portfolio increased in 100 billion, and it's overcome the investment made by International Monetary Fund. It shows that the World Bank reaction sometimes is quicker, faster, in some cases even more efficient, especially when we're speaking about structural reforms and necessity to adjust institutions to challenging environment in transitional period. And the current president, Mr. Kim, started 2 years ago a structural reform of the bank. We will discuss some outcomes of these reforms a little bit later. So now the World Bank Group structure is the following. We have this IBRD as the main institute inside the World Bank Group. IFC, IDA, ICSID, and MIGA. IBRD lending, current lending is last year, for fiscal year, it was around 18.6 billion. And IDA activity is bigger, lending and grants on the level of 22.2 billions. It's important to stress that this concessional finance assistance receive 82 poorest countries, but the trend is that the number of these countries is reducing. And it's a serious challenge because these countries move from their position when they can obtain and receive grants and very favorable conditions loans. Now they move to the group of countries where the conditions are more with more constraints for them, and it's a challenge, especially for such big borrowers as India, which already has this blend status, and moving from less developing countries to the mix group. IFC activity is pretty high, on the level of 22 billion, which they committed last fiscal year. And exit, there are still a lot of important cases. For example, investors versus Argentina, or Occidental Petroleum Corporation versus Republic of Ecuador, Mobile Telesystem versus Uzbekistan. So, who run the World Bank? Member countries, Board of Governors, Board of Executive Directors, and Office of the President. So, Board of Governors, you know, have usually two meetings, spring meeting and annual year meeting. But the current activities are under control of the Board of Directors, 25 members of the board. There are single constituencies and multi-country constituencies. Usually meet twice a week. So global commitment of the bank for 2014, 65 billion. And we see that the share of different regions more or less balance. So what is important for us is Europe and Central Asia. It's the sixth part of all operations the World Bank Group still realize in this region. And it's higher than in Latin America, for example, or East Asia and Pacific. Top 10 countries borrowers on IBRD side is Brazil, India, China, Ukraine, and some other countries you can see here. and on either side also India, because they are moving from this IDA to IBAD status. Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nigeria, and some others. So, what can do the World Bank in current very challenging environment and having strong competition from regional developing banks and also bilateral programs, developing programs. So it's true that it's necessary to adjust and solve this issue of so-called IDA graduation when 25 out of current 77 IDA countries should move to the mixed group. The goal of new strategy to eradicate extreme poverty. What is the extreme poverty by the World Bank definition? $125 per day per person. So by 2013, and coordinate of global resource mobilization, as in case of Ebola. It's a tasting case, very, very, very important. And to try to make next step on voice and participation reforms, which the new stage of discussion of this reform will start next year. So here we have we can see the country's potential IDA graduates by 2025. So the strengths of the World Bank. It's exceptional knowledge center. I was trying to find out that it's unique opportunity for not only for representatives of developing countries to obtain and receive best case practices, experience, and knowledge accumulated in best universities and research centers around the globe, and in the research team which the World Bank has. But it also a great opportunity for representatives of advanced countries better understand what's happening in the developing world. And the uniqueness of the bank that it operates on different levels. It works with private sector, with public sector, and there is research group, and we can test, and it's possible to test the result of this research and understanding of macroeconomic environment through operation, on operational level. So but there are some weaknesses. It's a structure which now in process of changes, voice distribution, and relatively limited resources. So among the opportunities, there's transformational engagements, partnerships, and leveraging. The great options which exist for the bank now, and just to leverage its resources and attract more donors and investors to the projects under umbrella of the bank. Usually this leveraging can be 2-3 times, sometimes up to 10 times. So it means that $1 invested by the bank can attract up to $10 outside investors. But there are also threats, reform implementation, it's a very challenging issue. Yes, this fragile balance between leaks and mix, competitive environment, and global risks. So it's important to understand that official development assistance growing, but the multilateral share is relatively small. So the bank, the function of the bank, to coordinate this assistance, to create some standards which can be, which can apply both traditional donors and new donors. We now have this gap between the activities realized by new donors and traditional donors. Standards are different, policies are different. So sometimes it's create complicated situation for the countries which receive this assistance. There are some examples in Africa when some donors try to constrain the activities because high level of debt or some violations which happened during implementation of some projects. But new donors appeared and offer new loans on different conditions. So it's affect the activity of different groups of investors and donors. So this, and vice versa. So this miscoordination is a challenging issue for development, and the bank can realize this policy which permit to coordinate activities of different donors. For sure, there is a strong cooperation between development banks and institutions, but also a component of competition exists. And now, among new potential competitors, for sure, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank and new development bank established by the BRICS. I strongly believe that it's necessary to make efforts and to find the way of coordination and cooperation between these new institutions and the World Bank Group. And there are the demand is huge, especially if we are speaking about infrastructure. The market is huge, so all this bank's activity, new and old one, just cannot breach all this gap. So it's just small portion of the investment which can facilitate or create trend in solving this critically important infrastructure needs and problems. So I strongly believe that we have a great chance for cooperation and even more closer contacts between regional development banks and the World Bank Group. So we can see that the World Bank Group still lead among the traditional developing banks, regional banks, by the size of operation and investments. But as I said, if we see the map, with the world map, and it's clear that the poorest regions still are in countries still are in Africa. But as I said before, there are pockets of poverty in mixed countries, and if we have this goal, eradication of extreme poverty, we should work with mix and leaks. There are strong groups of opponents to this approach, among them some shareholders in the World Bank, and who would like just focusing on Africa and the fragile states because of limited resources, their argument. And some researchers, Jeffrey Sachs, I had a long conversation with him just a couple of months ago, and he insisted, look, the best way to use these resources which the World Bank has, just to transform finally bank to the fund, use these resources in Africa and close the bank. It's simplification of the mission of the bank, and because, yes, now for the bank, sharing prosperity and eradication of poverty, key goals. But in our globalized economy, its mission can be broader and more important. Because the map of the world is changing. So here we can see countries resized by PPP, resized by trade, and by financial transactions. So we are witnesses of this growing interconnectedness. Before, it was mostly through exports of goods and services. Now we have huge interconnection in financial and banking area. It's up to 30 trillions. And how to deal with this? How to work with this new reality? And spill over and spill backs. So if something happened in advanced economies, it immediately affects the economic situation in emerging and developing countries, and vice versa. It's interesting that, for example, the US GDP dropped by 1%. Before this level of globalization, the effect was not so significant. So 0.1 or less in Europe, in Euro area, a little bit more in UK, and in emerging countries, maybe 0.15. With financial channels in normal times, this pressure for Europe more painful. It's 0.5 GDP drop in case something happened with the US economy. The same with Japan, and even worse with developing world. And in period of crisis, it's huge effect and damages. And we know that the spillbacks also existed if something happened with emerging economies. So it's how to tackle these issues. On the country level, yes, it's important to realize structural reforms, and it's the traditional and very easy response to any problems. If something happening in the world, usually advice from the international financial institutions, just do structural reforms in your country. And it's true, impact is important, but joint actions, the share and the importance of joint actions increase. And what institutions, and another major factor of changes happening is this shift of global economic power. So in 2000, the share of emerging and developing countries was 37%. And in 2023, just the reverse. You see? So who and what way, how we can adjust, respond to these challenges. I strongly insist that the Bretton Woods institutions, they have this capacity, but they can use this capacity only with deep transformation, with structural changes, policy changes, which are happening now at the World Bank. So, new strategy formally formalize these twin goals: eradication of poverty and boosting prosperity. Very important second part of this goal, because when we're speaking about boosting prosperity, it's mostly about inclusive growth. There are a lot of problems. If you would like to boost your prosperity, it's mostly about 30% of population on the down side of any society. Then you should tackle all the structural reforms, corruption, governments, efficiency of institutions. Very, very important part of this new strategy. One World Bank group, because unify the efforts of all these units, IFC, bank, MIGR, we're making, or the bank making this efforts now to create, because my first impression when I came to the bank, it's monstrous, huge, bureaucratic structure. 12,000 people. How to manage this system? Very complicated. And sometimes the country offices didn't know what's happening at the headquarters. Sometimes in the country offices, they don't know exactly what doing different units, the bank and IFC. Now, under this new strategy, a serious effort making to create a solution World Bank group, focusing on problem and to use capacity of different units to tackle this issue. And structural, very important structural adjustment. A new network was created, so-called global practices and cross-cutting solution areas. The bank also moving towards changes in business, culture and behavior. It's more complicated issues because you can change structure and policies relatively quickly during weeks and months. In worst case scenario, yes, couple of years. But to change a business culture and behavior, it takes time. So the World Bank now approve all these structural changes.
Are you going to come to the end soon?
Sorry.
You like to look at some questions.
So global practices, you can see this list. Cross-cutting topics, very important. Gender, jobs, climate change, PPP. And now let me switch. So I'm strong supporter of these changes. There are challenges on structural level to connect the activity of these global practices and regional and country units, but it's affordable. So, and briefly about the activity of the bank in eco-region, Europe and Central Asia. So a lot of challenges with the deep crisis in Ukraine, stagnation in Russia, slow growth in new EU members, but diversify our policy, and bank also trying to focus on MDG progress. We have different threshold of extreme poverty in eco-region. It's 2.5 US dollars, which better reflect the reality than 1.25. So these problems with the growth. It was a very important period of assistance during the post-socialist transition. Some successful operations in coal sector, monetization of social benefits, and also very extensive work with the private sector. In some countries still, though receiving this membership in EU, use the capacity of the bank. Poland, for example, every year receives 1 billion for loan to replace old loans and high interest rate loans and short-term loans to long-term with lower interest rates. Bulgaria involved in many problems. So Romania, and it was operational spike in the period of financial crisis. The bank focusing on the situation in banking sector. It was very, very helpful and important for these regions, because I have mostly worked with traditional EU members. So and very some EU banks withdraw capital from emerging economies and Eastern European countries. It was very fragile and an easy situation in banking sector in many CE countries, and the World Bank assists a lot. So among other things, the World Bank has 2 pillars of activities, and macro framework and environmental, social and fiscal policies. So sure, to work in ECA needs to meet high client demand and criteria. I would like to pay attention to these regional flagships. Very interesting reports, can be very helpful in your work. Russia is still an important partner for ECA and finance some trust fund portfolio. Though all operations in Russia now is frozen, new operations of the bank. So in ECA region, the bank trying to leverage its financing. And just a couple of words regarding work in Central Asia. Different, very ambitious projects, including CASA 1000, electricity transmission project through Tajikistan, or Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Afghanistan to Pakistan, climate adaptation mitigation projects, with some results, evident results, and well, here we have some data regarding operations in some Central Asian countries. I just would like to stress that diversify activities in different areas, and including in some very sensitive issues such as energy, water and development program. So the bank is working now to create a new instrument which permit to the countries of the region to exchange their water resources for electricity. So it can be an instrument which can help to solve some controversial situations and connected with the limits which have different countries, or with water resources or with electricity. And for sure, this technical analysis of Ragun Dam was very important and also sensitive part of World Bank activity in the region. And finally, I would like to pay attention to the World Bank activity in Ukraine. Current investment lending 4.6 billion. It's practically doubled during last year, and portfolio pretty diversified, but bank focusing on such issues as Ukrainian debt, situation in banking sector, tackling energy issues, and this kind of technical assistance sometimes is even more important than just financing. So let me stop here, and I apologize that it takes more time than I expected. This mandatory part of presentation.
Thank you very much.
And
We've got a lot of
Q&A.
wonderful detail here. So if people have questions for Dr. Grisham?
Yes,
I do have a
please.
question. Well, first of all, thanks for your talk. It was very interesting to see the history of the World Bank and how it's doing in Central Asia and Eastern Europe. I'm a Georgetown alumni, and I currently work for a company that we work with projects that are funded by the banks. And in my experience, we've seen that there's a disconnect between how the operations are created and some of the technologies available in the market that may help to make those operations more productive. Say resources, water, gasoline, create less of an impact in terms of climate change and whatnot. So I was wondering, what are the mechanisms that the World Bank uses to be able to keep up to date with the latest technology, and for their staff and technical experts to create those type of partnerships with the private sector?
Yeah, very good question. Thank you very much. And it's exactly about the reform which is happening now with the inside the bank, because the bank now created this practices not to accumulate the best experience and increase capacity to use the modern technologies when they appeared on the market. So it's exactly with this goal this global practices were created. So I hope that it help to increase efficiency of the World Bank activity on the one hand. On the other hand, we see these cross-cutting solution areas, and PPP is one of these areas. So it's very important model and instrument which the World Bank trying to extend and apply, especially in ECA region.
Questions?
That's a quick question. You mentioned infrastructure projects as being a major focus recently of World Bank investment, and I was wondering what sorts of financing mechanisms the World Bank Group has explored for these. Does the World Bank have a mechanism through which it finds itself more like an investment bank, perhaps funding projects, but also sort of packaging the securities as tradable securities, perhaps like an investment bank would for infrastructure projects? Is there something like OPIC or the U.S. government's infrastructure agency in operation currently with the World Bank, or in plan?
Yeah, thank you very much. It's very, very good and important questions, because it's true that the World Bank trying to create, first of all, a new team and facility, infrastructure facility, to focusing on this area, and create new instruments. It's where the World Bank experience can be helpful not only for the World Bank activity but other developing agencies, and to bridge this huge gap. There are institutional investors with big money, and they would like to invest in long-term projects, infrastructure projects. But there are a lot of risks, and to create instruments which can bridge this demand and supply is one of the tasks which the World Bank trying to solve. So still technical discussion how it can be done. So, but I believe that maybe in some reasonable period the World Bank could disseminate this information about these approaches and different instruments which it would like to create. So, but it's exactly this direction, to not only to be investor, but to create this connection between private sector and public sector, between institutional investors and new form of realized infrastructure projects which can tackle the risks and create more comfortable environment for investments, for those who invest in these projects, and under guarantees of the World Bank Group. Yeah, please.
Yeah, I have a question. You know, in China, also many projects from World Bank, and we also discussed how World Bank get more efficiency, not just only put money. Yeah, maybe put money is important, especially in the beginning, but in the process, when we learning by practice, especially the experts to organize and the training the local people is more important. So how do you think, what is the more important to help the local develop?
Yeah, thank you very much for this question. But if we take the experience of China activities and interaction with the World Bank, it's exactly about this capacity of the World Bank not only invest but train the people, educate, facilitate management. I'm not sure that China in need of this World Bank financing. China has enough resources in internal resources, finance. But why China still among the top borrowers and countries which realize very intensively the World Bank projects and programs? Because it facilitates to create these teams, management teams, to train local people, to understand how to realize projects since the beginning till the end. So it's very important value added to this financing. And I think that China example is very, very important and successful way of cooperation with the World Bank Group. It's understandable that the knowledge accumulated by the bank and this pool of best practices, what is sometimes more important than the just funding of some operations. And these structural reforms focusing to open this capacity, to extend this value-added activity on the side of the bank.
Yeah, maybe you could fill in what you were going to talk about the CASA 1000 and the Bank projects, and in particular how you address tensions among the upstream and downstream countries.
Thank you very much. It's a long, well, it's very complicated and important questions, and maybe for a couple of more lectures or presentations. But briefly, trying to respond to this question, I already mentioned that it's important to find instruments which permit to tackle for the countries of the region these advantages and disadvantages that they have in their economies. Some of them are rich in water resources, others produce more electricity than they consume and they can sell it. So that's why the World Bank now focusing on creation of these instruments which permit to exchange of this goods or services or resources in peaceful way, without conflicts and tensions. It's first thing, a technocratic approach. The second thing, it's important to continue dialogue between the countries. Dialogue is better than any kind of pressures. The World Bank Group organized such kind of discussions around, for example, assessment of Rangoon dam and construction of Rangoon power station. Not everybody happy with the outcome, it's true, but it permits to adjust position of different countries, to find some areas where it's possible to cooperate. Disagreement exists, but this is a way to solution through dialogue. So it's another very important pillar of the World Bank activity in Central Asia. And the third pillar is trying to connect their economic needs and market to extend international cooperation. CASA 1000 is exactly about this. The demanded price on electricity is much higher in Pakistan. Roughly now it can be up to 25-30 cents per kilowatt, and their production price can be 5 cents per kilowatt. Huge gap and very attractive. But how to do it? Because there is conflicting areas and countries. To help to connect two markets and to extend their economic capacity to cooperate internationally, it's also a very important mission of the bank in the region.
Thank you very much, and please join me in thanking Dr. Grisham for a very interesting.
Thank you. Thank you.